Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. So, tonight we're going to be talking to Jeff Younger, a Texas father who's been locked in a very highly publicized court battle against his ex wife over their son, James. Now, the conflict began about 10 years ago when Jeff's ex wife, who happens to be a pediatrician, started to transition one of their twin boys into a girl when the child was only a toddler. Because of Jeff's opposition to his son's transition, his ex sought to restrict Younger's involvement, filing a restraining order to prevent him from speaking out about their child's gender identity. She also pushed for changes in their custody arrangement to compel Jeff to acknowledge James as a girl. Jeff then, fearing the possibility of his child undergoing irreversible medical treatments, launched a public campaign, #ProtectJamesYounger, which garnered significant support from conservative figures like Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Dan Crenshaw. Now, despite an initial jury ruling in favor of Jeff's ex, giving her sole authority over their son's medical decisions, a Dallas judge later overturned this decision, reinstating joint custody and emphasizing that both parents must agree on any medical treatment for the twins, which would be a win. But in 2021, the court awarded full custody to Jeff's ex, citing Jeff's alleged failure to comply with child support and court orders, which a claim that Jeff disputes. Jeff hasn't only been taking this battle to the courts, he's also taken it to the Texas state legislature, where he played a crucial role in the passage of a law that banned medically transitioning minors. And as a result, his ex moved herself and the kids to California. Jeff then petitioned the Texas Supreme Court to demand she bring the kids back, but they dismissed his petition. So Jeff moved to California and he tried to battle it out there, but you can imagine how that went. Jeff hasn't seen his sons in 3 years, but he isn't giving up the fight. He's still battling in court to stop his ex from moving forward with the medical transitioning of their son, but he has announced in a heartfelt message on social media that he has moved back to Texas. And in the message, he expressed despair and deep love for his children, urging them to find him when they're adults if they feel lost or confused by the decisions made during their childhood. So we're going to be talking to Jeff tonight about how this shocking story has even been allowed to happen. Jeff, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
A lot of us are wondering how in the heck something like this happens. And we've heard about these stories. We've heard about obviously your story even in the news, and it's shocking. And then everybody's afraid that this is going to happen to them and their kids. So kind of take us back a bit to the beginning. Well, how old are your twins now?
They're 12.
They're 12 now. And you started this battle when?
When they were 2.
They were 2. So their mom. So tell us the story of how, starting with what made your ex-wife believe that your 2-year-old was actually a girl.
So we don't have to guess because, we have sworn testimony at trial where she explained this to a jury in Texas. And she said that my son asked for a girl's toy in a McDonald's Happy Meal. And then a few days later, he asked for a silver purse at Target that had a unicorn on it. And that's when she started thinking he might be a girl. And it wasn't long after that before she actually had socially transitioned him and was presenting him to the world in a dress. It was only a few months after that.
So because he had asked for the girl, I mean, this is, my husband jokes about how when he was a little boy, and they took him to Disney World or Disneyland for the first time, and he wanted the Minnie ears. He didn't want the Mickey ears. He wanted the Minnie ears because he thought they looked more interesting to him at 3 years old. At 3 years old, they had a bow, so it was cute. So for her to think that, so that's bizarre. So she just thought, well, he asked for girl toys, and he's asking for, and he seems to like, he's attracted to girly things at the toy store. So therefore he must be a girl. I mean, what does this say about?
That's the official story that she told the jury, Kim. I don't believe that story. None of my lawyers have believed that story. And people that knew her from church that I know don't believe that story. So I think she's using this as a mechanism. Well, I think she's using this as a mechanism simply to wrest sole control of the children from me. She doesn't want to
Oh,
co-parent with me, and she harbors a lot of resentment towards me, and she's using this as a mechanism to essentially use state power over my relationship with my children in order to, I think, largely to hurt me.
that would
I actually don't
be
believe she thinks he's
psychotic.
transgender. I don't actually think she believes that, actually.
Right, but that would be to a whole different level of psychosis. I mean, that's to
Yeah.
harm your own child, right? To go to this level with your own
Hmm.
child just to hurt your ex is, I mean, that would be a whole different. That's a whole different animal of insanity.
I agree. And I think it's really in the family courts becoming the next domestic violence charge. You know, false domestic violence charges are rife in the family courts. I myself had a criminal trial for domestic violence. I had a $80,000 I had to pay for a lawyer because in Texas, if you're convicted of domestic violence, you can never have custody of a child for the rest of your life. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, so I fought that with a very good lawyer here in Dallas, and in 15 minutes the jury came back with a not guilty verdict because it was ridiculous. But it's a
Yeah.
silver bullet in family court if you can get these to stick. I think transgender, you know, saying that your child is transgender is becoming that kind of a silver bullet because then they can say, well, this father is not acting in the best interest of the children. And the
Yeah.
courts seem to be willing to go along with it. I mean, I got supervised visitation. I haven't seen my kids in 3 years just because of that. Yeah.
Well, here in California, Gavin Newsom did one good thing, which was
Mhm.
he vetoed a law that was passed where
Mhm.
they wanted to actually put that into the child custody cases, whether or not a parent, they wanted a judge to be forced to consider whether or not a parent was willing to acknowledge the child's gender identity as part of a
Right.
custody battle. I mean, and luckily he did actually veto that, but that just goes to show how, I
Well,
mean, the fact that the legislature actually passed that law
past it. Yeah.
is, yeah, insane to even begin with.
Well, let me give you a little some thinking about that because you know I lived in California for 6 months. I've moved back to Texas because I've just decided that the courts aren't going to let me see my kids. But I had a residence in Glendale in LA County. But look, so a lot the way that these people work, and this is true in the Republican Party as well. And I can give you examples from the bill that I passed here. But let's look at what Gavin Newsom did. He vetoed this bill, but the thing is, the judges are already free to consider whether you accept your child as transgender as part of the best interest of the child standard in California. So it was a real easy veto for him because he could please some of the more conservative elements of California, which I don't think most people know there are a lot of
Hmm.
people with conservative tendencies and libertarian tendencies in California. And it allowed him an easy way to please them without hurting the left because judges can already do it. In fact, in my case
Right.
in California right now, Judge Mark Uhas is considering my refusal to accept that my son is a girl, and he is going to determine which parent can act in the best interest of the child based on that. It's actually happening in my case right now.
Okay, so let's go
So
back
they
to the
use these
beginning. So,
loopholes. Yeah,
yeah, right. Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, you make a great point in that. Yeah, he vetoed forcing judges to have to look at the
right.
gender identity of a child, but they're free to do it without being
They're free to
forced.
do it.
Yeah. So,
Can I
which
give you an
here in,
example in Texas
go
about
ahead. Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
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 So, you know, when I lobbied for this bill 8 years, I spent a couple $100,000 trying to get this done, and I mobilized all the rural counties of Texas to do it. And we outlawed the chemical castration and surgical castration of children here in Texas. But they left out three key sentences from the bill that I wrote. Otherwise, they passed the bill I wrote, but they left out three sentences, which would have classified it as felony child sexual abuse if anybody performed these procedures on children. The reason that was important is it would prevent parents from taking their children out of state or out of country to do these procedures. If you take
Mm,
your child to Thailand, where sexual activity with very young people is legal and so forth, and you come back to Texas, you're going to go to the slammer for the rest of your life. You can't
Hmm.
take your child out of Texas to abuse them. So they took that
Hmm.
out so they can come to the Texas electorate and the Republicans can say, hey, we're very conservative. We stopped this practice in Texas while pleasing their liberal donors in the Republican Party, saying, see, we left a loophole, and they can go to California or Colorado and get it done. It's the way they
Yeah.
play.
Okay, so 10 years ago, your ex-wife decided that your son was a boy. How popular was this? I mean, this is all over and everybody talks about this now in today's society, but I don't remember this being a thing 10 years ago, as big of a thing.
It
Was
really
this a
wasn't.
popular, was it? Okay, it wasn't.
No, no, it wasn't. And it was, nobody had even heard of it. I'll tell you how rare it was. I went to my representative and explained to him what was happening in court, that they were letting this happen. And I said, we need to impeach this judge. And obviously, we need a law against this. My representative, who I had known for a decade before that, I mean, I helped get him into office, told me I was crazy and literally showed me the door. He just thought it was nuts. And so I called in a favor and said, look, you're a lawyer. I'm just asking you to come to a hearing in Dallas County and sit for 15 minutes. He did. And he left and called every member of the legislature. He couldn't believe it. Nobody had ever heard of this before. I was probably the first case in Texas and one of the first in the nation. The reason I think that it was used in my case is my ex-wife is a pediatrician. And the communications had gone out to the American Academy of Pediatrics about changes to the DSM-5 and so forth. And she was able to then think, well, I think I can use this against him because he'll never agree to this. And I think she was a doctor, and that's why she saw it very early.
And this was in Texas
It's in Texas, in Dallas, Texas.
when you started. So she's since moved and took the kids to California. You followed for a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but now you're back to, but this all started. So this is even more alarming, I think, for people because when people think about a situation like this, they're thinking San Francisco, right? They're thinking
Right.
liberal LA, liberal New York,
That's right.
liberal California. That's where these types of kooky liberal people live, and they're the ones who
Mm-hmm.
would do something like this. But you know what's really interesting about this, Jeff, is I'm wondering, and I want to go back to that the DSM, the five. You said it was that they changed
DSM-5,
the
yeah.
definition
Mm-hmm.
because I don't now I hear a lot of cases like this. I have numerous friends who have transgendered kids, that they
Mm-hmm.
think is trans, so this is definitely a trend that's going on. But the first time I'd ever heard about this was interestingly another case in Texas, a friend of mine whose
Mm-hmm.
ex-wife was also a doctor, interestingly, a
Right.
pediatrician, interestingly.
Yes.
And this
Yes.
was around, I want to say, about 10 years ago when they had
Right.
a teenage daughter at the time. They had two
Mm-hmm.
girls. A teenage daughter was maybe 10, she was about 12 years old. And the next time I spoke to him, he said, I was like, what are you doing? What are you up to? And he goes, I'm out hiking with my son. And I'm like, son, did he find a kid? What's happened? Did he find a kid? Like some woman came around and said, by the way, this one's yours. And he said, and then he explained to me that the daughter they had who had been going through a lot of she had a lot of depression and she was doing a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
she had a lot of, they struggled with her mental health for years.
Mm-hmm.
And that it turned out that the real cause of all of her stress and trauma and all, was that she was really a he. And they started the transitioning process. And that was the first time I'd ever come across
Mm-hmm.
that or heard of that. And interestingly, that was about 10 years ago in around Dallas, Texas, and the mom was a doctor. And so maybe is that where this started? Did it start with this changing of the definition in the DSM that made them, what does that stand for? The what does that stand?
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and 5 is the
Okay.
version.
Okay. So I wonder, after hearing this from you and knowing of my friend who had this go on,
Mm-hmm.
now he didn't fight it, he went along with it from what I understand, but did it start there? Was it that somebody in the academia of mental health decided to change the definitions and put more, and then that pediatricians and doctors started seeing that and thinking, wow, oh, this is something, okay, and then explaining away kids having different behavior, as well. I guess they're just trans, and I'm wondering if that's where this started.
Well, I'll tell you, if you're interested in this topic, there's a very, very good book it's called The Book of Woe. And I can't remember the author's name, but he's a psychiatrist and he delivers just, I believe, a crushing critique of the DSM-5. And one of the things that he points out is that the diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5 are basically nowadays pathologizing normal human problems and
Mm-hmm.
turning them into mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Think about puberty. What is puberty? Well, it's physical, psychological, and social changes as you come to grips with your sex role in your society, right?
Right.
That comes along with all kinds of uncomfortableness. It comes along with all kinds of mistakes that you're going to make along the way. And I can tell you legions of mistakes I made along the way. When I was growing up, we had a lot of tomboys. I grew up on a farm and a ranch in Panhandle, Texas. All of them, after puberty, became beautiful women. They're most sought after wives in Texas because they can hunt, ride, and shoot with you. You know, um, this is another fact. Like, this is what puberty is. Puberty is the cure for gender dysphoria. It's the
Yeah.
physical, psychological, and social process where you come to grips with your gender. So we shouldn't expect children to not have maladaptive behaviors, and we shouldn't expect them to lack difficulties as they come into this complex modern world, figuring out what it means to be a man or a woman. That's the first thing. Pathologizing normal human problems that
Yeah.
probably shouldn't be considered mental health issues. The second thing is the process by which these diagnostic criteria and these so-called mental health problems are developed, these categorizations of mental health problems. They are not developed by scientific processes. And this is very
Mm-hmm.
important for people to know. They're done by voting consensus among psychiatrists and psychologists. And that's not how science works. Science doesn't work by a voting consensus. It works by replication of experiments.
Right.
But the DSM works by consensus. Now, I'll submit to you, and your audience can Google this term. You may not have heard this term before. It's called entryism.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that the hard left developed in the early part of the 20th century, and I believe perfected in the 1970s. And they can go into any consensus-driven organization and take control of it. And that's essentially what happened with the DSM-5. There was a riot essentially in 2016 when they were looking at changing the DSM. And a large group of activists took over the definitions. And just to let you know how these definitions can change radically and totally affect people's lives, really until the late 90s, homosexuality was considered a mental disorder in the DSM. In the DSM-3, it was classified as a mental disorder. And then it was just simply taken out as a mental disorder. Well, what happened? Did the scientific studies all of a sudden change? For 50 years of scientific studies that they originally based it on change? No. What changed was the social consensus among psychiatrists. And that's what you see reflected in the DSM-5. And the problem with it is these psychiatrists can develop a social consensus in the DSM-5, and then they can go into courts and testify as experts and give their social opinions the imprimatur of science and give expert testimony in family court. And that's kind of what I've been facing.
Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.